In accordance with Standing Order 43, the Prime Minister on indulgence.
On a short indulgence,
Yes.
I also want to acknowledge the members who are having to leave the Parliament today, as the member Patterson also just acknowledged the members of Labor who are doing the same thing. This crisis continues, and we thank all of those who continue to do such selfless work, volunteering to keep others safe. Please follow the local instructions as this crisis continues, and we continue to stand with all of those doing so much great work for their fellow Australians at this time.
And the Leader of the Opposition also on a brief indulgence.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in thanking our emergency service and particularly our SES workers, and I want to thank the Minister, Little Proud, for this morning. I had a comprehensive briefing from Joe Buffoni, the Director-General of Emergency Management Australia, and his staff was also provided with Senator Watt, our Shadow Minister, and importantly we were able to get Sussan Templeman, the member for Macquarie, on the phone as well. The people of Macquarie have had the lot thrown at them over recent years. They're doing it really tough, and our thoughts are with all those who are continuing to suffer from these devastating floods, and we urge them to follow the advice of the authorities. But once again, I thank the Minister for the briefing.
As I said, in accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister was really listening to the concerns of women, why hasn't he started by listening to the concerns of Brittany Higgins and asked his own staff what they knew and when about her reported sexual assault only metres from his office, and as well asked his own staff whether they have undermined the loved ones of Brittany Higgins? Why does the Prime Minister claim he's listening when he's not only failing to listen, but more importantly, failing to act?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I have asked my staff regarding the matter involving the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins, Mr Speaker, and I've reported to this very House on that matter. I did that on answer to numerous questions, Mr Speaker.
Members on my
They
left.
first became aware on the 12th of February and I became aware on the 15th of February, Mr Speaker. That is my evidence to this very House, and I stand by that, Mr Speaker. I've been very clear about this the entire time, Mr Speaker.
The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. And my question also is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please outline to the House how the Morrison government continues to act in providing much-needed support to flood-ravaged communities across Australia, including New South Wales and my home state of Queensland?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question. And it's important to hear from the member for Moncrieff as a representative of South East Queensland, because as we know the devastation that is occurring for the floods across New South Wales, it is not just in New South Wales. South East Queensland is similarly being impacted, Mr Speaker, and that's why it's so important. It's so important, Mr Speaker, that we understand that this current flood crisis extends beyond and across many state borders. Once again, Mr Speaker, today I met with the Director-General of Emergency Management Australia, Joe Buffoni, who was doing an absolutely sensational job. It was also Joe Buffoni who acted for the government in leading the government's response on the Aged Care Response Centre in Victoria and did a tremendous job there, Mr Speaker, and he's doing another tremendous job now as the Head of Emergency Management Australia. And I also met with the Chief of Defence Force, General Campbell, along with the Minister for Emergency Management, Mr Speaker, is also doing an extraordinary job, as he does always on these occasions, and of course the Acting Minister for Defence. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that the rain and flood situation remains incredibly dynamic. There is a trough on the east coast that has merged with a trough extending from the Kimberleys to the east coast, causing heavy rain and inland flooding. There's severe weather, high winds, damaging surf, and heavy rain is forecast for the east coast. Western New South Wales, North East and South Australia, South-Western Queensland and Eastern Western Australia have been affected by inland flooding. Queensland, Brisbane and the Gold Coast have been impacted by heavy rain causing flash flooding. In New South Wales there's some 1,700 SES volunteers, Mr Speaker, who are responding together with the New South Wales RFS and Fire and Rescue Squad, of which they form a part. Some 18,000 people have been impacted by evacuation orders. The Defence Forces are now marshalling together to support the clean-up effort, and that was the basis of the meeting I had earlier today with the Chief of the Defence Force, as we put in plans to ensure that we can move within days and to work in concert with the New South Wales Government to begin that clean-up operation. But for now, Mr Speaker, they're very much involved with the services out of Nowra, supporting particularly the south coast of New South Wales. I'm sure both as the members for Gilmore and Eden Monaro would be aware that today the risk very much moves to the south coast of New South Wales with heavy winds and the potential, Mr Speaker, for trees to be felled and people to be put in great risk. And as a result, the Defence Forces have also mobilised to that. I also want to thank the staff at Services Australia. They received 19,600 calls yesterday, Mr Speaker. Over $3 million in assistance already paid out, with many more much more assistance still to be provided, Mr Speaker. The government is responding to this crisis. The government is there standing with the state governments and working closely to ensure those efforts are coordinated, and I thank everybody for the great work that they're doing at this difficult time.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the Prime Minister sought to use a confidential complaint about alleged workplace misconduct inside a media organisation to dismiss questions. Is it any wonder victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment in this building and around Australia are afraid of coming forward when the Prime Minister of this country uses a confidential complaint in a nationally televised media conference as a way to try and stop journalists asking questions about these important issues?
The Prime Minister has
thank the member for her question. And, Mr Speaker, that is not what I was doing today, Mr Speaker. What I was simply doing today, Mr Speaker,
members
is
on my
left.
broader
The broader point, Mr Speaker, that the matters that we are dealing with in this place, and all of us in this place, all members of this place have a responsibility for getting this House in order, Mr Speaker, when it comes to these issues. These issues are not confined to any one side of politics, as we have read in the reports over this past month. These things that have been reported are disgusting and they are shameful, Mr Speaker, and they have no place in this House. I was simply making the point, Mr Speaker, that the problems that we are experiencing in this country are not confined simply to the offices of members and senators and ministers in this place, Mr Speaker, and go well beyond that. Go well beyond that, Mr Speaker. The way I referred to these matters today was an anonymised way, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, as a result...
Members on both sides.
As a result, the broader
Shortland.
The broader point, Mr Speaker, the broader point is the one I sought to highlight today. The broader problem of women having to put up with this rubbish for so long, Mr Speaker, has to stop, Mr Speaker, and it takes all of us to stop it.
Members on both sides. Member for Eden Monaro, members for Cowan. Many others have mentioned the member for Shortland. I will simply make use of Standing Order 94A if interjectors continue in the fashion they have been. The member for Nichols.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is supporting those communities impacted by the flooding in regional Australia?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Nichols for his question, Mr Speaker, and as the floods continue, we stand with those communities affected. As a government, as a parliament, as people, our priority as a government is to support emergency measures ensuring people remain safe and secure. In times such as this, our country relies on those first responders, those magnificent SES, police, ambulance, fire, all of those people. They are magnificent. And of course, not to mention our ADF, who are ready and are supporting already the efforts to deal with these floods. Around 18,000 people have already been evacuated from their homes, many of them now in evacuation centres or relying upon family and friends. At the worst of times, you see the best in Australians. People need to be vigilant, they need to be patient, they need to listen to the advice of local emergency services, and they absolutely need to act accordingly. It's not just the East Coast Mr Speaker, the Kimberley region in Western Australia has seen more than 700 millimetres of rain between Fitzroy Crossing and Derby. To put this in further context, Derby, its annual rainfall last year was 703.6 millimetres. So they've actually received their annual rainfall in just a matter of days. Some parts of New South Wales will see between 100 and 300 millimetres of rainfall over the next 24 hours, which is not isolated to coastal areas. Moree and surrounding areas of the member for Parkes electorate have received 200 millimetres of rain yesterday and overnight, and there's more on the way. And I know the member has told me that he's never seen Warrialda Creek as high as it is at the moment. The Guida is rising. Local schools and supermarkets in some parts of his electorate are closing to ensure the safety of students and staff. Peter Prosser, he's a stock and station agent based in Mungindi in New South Wales. He's currently in Tamworth. He's unable to travel home because of the flood impact of roads between Narrabri and Moree and through to Mungindi. He's unable to cart stock to market, and he's unable to reach his property in Tenterfield to assess damage or to recover any assets. And this is just one example, one individual example of what's happening right across the East Coast, right across our inland areas. There are road closures of major transport arteries across New South Wales. I've heard the Prime Minister, I know the opposition leader joins in this, that if there are floodwaters across roads, don't enter them. Do not think that you can get across because you don't know the depth and you don't know how tragic the consequences could be for yourself and indeed for those people who may have to come and rescue. So just please follow the advice, given by emergency management and personnel. We will rebuild. We will get through this. We will be better for it, as we always are. These are times of crisis and we're here to help.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Prime Minister. Why is it that the Prime Minister knew about a confidential complaint in a media organisation but claims he didn't know about a reported sexual assault that allegedly occurred just metres from his office for 2 years?
The Prime Minister.
Because it's the truth, Mr Speaker.
The member for Indi has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The nation is watching this parliament's response to the events of the past month and is crying out for action on the appalling treatment of women. Right now, there are 2 bills before the House: the Sex Discrimination Bill from the member for Warringah and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Standards Bill I introduced in October. These are 2 good faith bills that, if passed, would make a concrete difference and demonstrate to the nation that the Prime Minister is willing to finally act and show real leadership. Why won't you support these bills so we can pass them as a matter of urgency?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Our national parliament should aim to be a model workplace. That's the standard that we must set together in this place, and I'm sure all members would agree with that very statement. We have taken a number of steps in the past few weeks to address the concerns raised by current and former staff and by parliamentarians. The member will be aware of the changes that have already been made to the counselling support service. I hope to receive very shortly recommendations from the Deputy Secretary of my department regarding a complaints process that can be put in place as an interim before awaiting the outcome of the Jenkins review that is being done on a multi-partisan basis. Mr Speaker, the government has announced an independent review into the Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces, which is being led by the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Ms Kate Jenkins, and we're going to await the findings of that review before doing an assessment of the issues raised in the bill. But I'm saying that we will be acting on the matters that are being brought forward by the Deputy Secretary that I think will make a real change in terms of the workplace practices in this building, and I'm sure, I have no doubt that those types of changes will be supported. So, Mr Speaker, whether it is the matters that are raised in the bill that you've referred to that has been brought forward under your own name, or those that have been brought forward by the member for Warringah, Mr Speaker, we appreciate that all efforts need to be taken to address sexual harassment. and the draft bill that has been put forward by the member for Ringa, as I noted, does represent a fundamental change to the application of the Sex Discrimination Act so that it might apply to all areas of people's public and private lives, Mr Speaker, and among others, this would have the effect of expanding the Australian Human Rights Commission's function to matters arising in private life. Now, Mr Speaker, that is my understanding of that arrangement on the advice that I have. The bill would also make the Sex Discrimination Act out of step with other anti-discrimination legislation which focuses on the discrimination in public life. So, Mr Speaker, I'm looking forward to shortly to be able to provide a response to the Respect at Work report, which I also believe, Mr Speaker, should have been done well before this time, and I look forward to be doing that, Mr Speaker, in the very near future. And we will take action on that as we have taken action on the National Action Plan, Mr Speaker, in the past, and we will continue to take action on these important matters.
The member for Indi.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. I also asked about the Commonwealth Parliamentary Standards Bill.
Well, the Prime Minister's concluded his answer, so I need to move to the next question. The member for Robertson.
And thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how our strong economic recovery is helping the Morrison government to provide support during unprecedented events like the COVID-19 pandemic and also the severe flooding that we are currently experiencing in large parts of the country?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for a question to acknowledge her experience in the private sector and as a very fierce and staunch advocate for the people of the Central Coast, Mr Speaker. And more than 17,000 people in the members' electorate have graduated from JobKeeper. And I had the opportunity to visit the members' electorate and to meet with one of the successful small businesses, Terrigal Electric, to hear how the government's apprentice incentive scheme has helped see that business take on its first female apprentice electrician, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, the Australian economy has been tested over the course of the last 18 months. We've seen the drought, we've seen floods, we've seen fire, and of course we've seen the COVID-19 pandemic. And today our economy is being tested again in Queensland and New South Wales with the terrible floods. And the government is responding with payments of $1,000 to adults and $400 to children, as well as income support, getting that money out the door as quickly as possible to those communities in need. And when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have committed as a government $251 billion. That's the equivalent of around 13% of GDP, and it's more than twice what all the states and territories combined have committed, Mr Speaker. Now, more than $150 billion is out the door already. $86 billion on JobKeeper, $35 billion on the cash flow boost, $20 billion on the coronavirus supplement, and $12 billion in 4 payments, 2 of $750, 2 of $250, to millions of veterans, carers and others across our community, pensioners who are on income support. And this economic support is help driving the economic recovery. And we saw economic growth in the December quarter of 3.1%. The first time our country has seen consecutive quarters of economic growth of more than 3%. And what was particularly pleasing, it was being led by the private sector. Higher business investment, higher investment in housing, higher and larger number of motor vehicle sales, and of course higher household consumption, Mr Speaker. And we've seen our labour market rebound strongly with an unemployment rate of 5.8%. And I've said to this House before, what Chris Richardson, a noted economist, said it was a stunning result in our labour market, Mr Speaker. A stunning result in our labour market with 5.8% unemployment, and the fact that all of those 88,700 jobs created in February were full-time jobs, more than 80% went to women and more than 40% went to younger people. So our economy is being tested, but we are delivering jobs, jobs and more jobs.
The member for Gorton.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The 10 Network reported government staffers had allegedly brought in sex workers to Parliament House for government MPs, including a minister. What steps has the Prime Minister taken to investigate these very serious allegations which constitute a blackmail risk and potentially jeopardise national security?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. It is indeed a very, very serious issue in terms of what was reported yesterday afternoon. Deeply distressing, deeply shocking. I note that I understand the report referred to a former minister, not a current minister, so I would simply make that point, and I don't think that's disputed or
members on my list.
Any other implication was being suggested by the member in the question that was raised. Mr Speaker, two things have directly been done. Obviously, we are seeking to pursue those matters with those who are already known to us, and there's only one individual that was the subject of the reports yesterday, and that person has been had their employment terminated. But we have reached out through whatever avenues we have for people who have knowledge of that to bring that knowledge forward. So not only can it be addressed by the government, Mr Speaker, or in any proper authorities for that matter, but I have no doubt the presiding officers as well regarding the use of certain parts of this building would be equally distressing and shocking, Mr Speaker, to the presiding officers. I find this just absolutely abhorrent that this could occur. We're in no position, Mr Speaker, to establish its truth or accuracy, and that has not been established. But if anyone has information on this issue, Mr Speaker, I would be very keen for them to make that available to us.
The member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. Will the Minister update the House as to how the Morrison government is supporting flood-affected victims in New South Wales, Queensland and other states? What other critical assistance is the Morrison government providing?
The Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and his interest for this very dynamic situation that spreads from Western Australia across in the Northern Territory, South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, and in fact only in the last couple of minutes I received an update from the Bureau of Meteorology that now has flood warnings for both Victoria and parts of Tasmania. Such is the scale of this event, and one in which our emergency services have done an outstanding job in protecting Australian lives. Not one fatality. Those men and women that have put themselves in the front line have done an outstanding job in keeping us safe. To put that in perspective, there's been over 850 rescues, 9,500 requests for help, and there are now 18,000 Australians that aren't in their homes today because of this rain event. But they will continue to work with not only the state governments in all those jurisdictions, but also the federal government. And today I can advise the House that I initiated the National Coordination Mechanism as a result of feedback from Senator Payne and the member for Macquarie around shortages in supermarkets in Western Sydney. And I can advise that the House that I've only just been advised by Coles that they intend to helicopter goods into North Richmond store this afternoon as soon as arrangements can be made. So we will continue to make sure that that mechanism is worked through in every community where there are shortages, where we're unable to get trucks or get boats across to support these communities in their hour of need. We're also working with NBN and Telstra to make sure that they are ready to pivot into these communities where telecommunications has been brought down so that we can restore them as quickly as we can. And we have obviously last night, after the request from the New South Wales Government, allowed the support of 2 helicopters for rescue to be used in addition to their aircraft, as well as standing up ADF's personnel to come in for the clean-up. So we're preparing for the clean-up as we speak now and understanding that this will take a considerable amount of time. We are working with those states around the assessments of the damage, and we will build on the initial support that the federal government has outlined that is there for those Australians who have endured damage to their properties, which is a disaster recovery payment of $1,000 per adult and $400 per child over the 34 local government areas in New South Wales alone, but we are expecting the other states to make application for that very soon, and when they do we will approve that and the money will flow through Centrelink as it has already, over $3.5 million. There's also income support for anyone whose income has been impacted. There's 13 weeks of income support at job seeker and study levels, and we encourage no one to self-assess. The road to recovery to anyone that has been impacted will be a long one, but they should take solace in the fact that the Australian people will stand with them on that road to recovery and getting them back
up and going again.
The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. It has been reported that for 2 years no one talked to the security guard who discovered Brittany Higgins after her reported sexual assault in the Defence Minister's office. How is this possible?
Members on my left, I want to hear from the Leader of the House in silence.
Mr Speaker, a couple of points. Firstly, there are matters in this House that are properly dealt with by the presiding officers, so questions are best put to the Speaker or in the other place to the President. That's the appropriate course of action in relation to some of these matters. Second point, Mr Speaker, is that the Australian Federal Police Commissioner, Mr Kershaw, has been very clear in relation to the Brittany Higgins matter. That is that there is a police investigation that is underway at the moment. It may well result in an arrest and a criminal trial here in the ACT or in some other jurisdiction. He has made it very clear to members in this House that his preference is to allow the police to conduct their operation without public commentary, without further public commentary that may potentially compromise either an investigation, the gathering of evidence, or indeed a successful prosecution. And, Mr Speaker, I would ask that on that basis the Leader of the Opposition should reconsider the appropriateness of that question. Well, you didn't ask it, but you directed for it to be asked, and you should withdraw it and consider, Mr Speaker,
members on my left,
the view of the Police Commissioner. And I think that view should prevail in this matter.
The member for Isaacs won't be here very long if he keeps the manager of opposition. I'm going to hear the manager of opposition business. The manager of opposition business on a point of order.
Yeah, to the point of order, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the House's points all presume that this question works on the basis that it could have only been the police who were asking questions of the security guard. That's not the question that's in front of us. The question that's in front of us is that no one asked questions. Now, given that we are talking about something that happened to a member of staff within the ministerial wing, given that the Prime Minister subsequently has initiated a number of different inquiries, there are many different points where questions could be asked. None have. I don't discount for a minute the issues that have been raised had the question presumed that we were asking why haven't the police asked.
Okay.
But that's not what this question says.
Well, I'm going to rule on this very clearly for the benefit of all members. Not all members will have been watching Senate estimates yesterday, but the President of the Senate made very clear his approach, and indeed my approach, to answering questions once a criminal investigation has begun. Made that abundantly clear, and I completely concur with him, and statements on our behalf have made that very clear. I've listened to the manager of opposition business. I've listened to what he's had to say, but the question as it's framed is not within the responsibility of the Prime Minister. I'll move to the next question. And I call the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is providing critical ADF support to those communities impacted by flooding and stands ready to respond to further requests for assistance?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, obviously the highest priority for the government at the moment is to make sure that Australians are safe from COVID and to make sure that those people who are suffering as a result of the floods at the moment are given every protection, not only now but in the recovery phase as well, Mr Speaker. The government is determined to work very closely with the emergency service personnel in New South Wales and in Queensland and potentially in Victoria as well. We want to make sure, Mr Speaker, that every Commonwealth asset possible will be provided to support these Australians who, in many cases, have lost their homes, have lost livestock, have lost assets and the life that they knew only a week ago. And Mr Speaker, the Australian Defence Force has one of the greatest capacities in the world to deal with threats offshore and domestically, but they also have, Mr Speaker, an incredible skill base to provide support to Australians. And as the Minister earlier pointed out, the Australian Defence Force has now committed assets, both personnel and helicopters, that will be based out of RAF Base Richmond and also Nowra and Bega. It'll be a 24-hour operation. They will provide support to protect the safety of life, which is the highest priority now, and to provide support to people as they evacuate, to provide support to people in situations where they may seek to go into flooded crossings and riverways, and they will provide support, Mr Speaker, in the recovery phase as well. We want to help people get back to their normal life as quickly as possible, but this is a very, very dramatic situation. And as the Prime Minister and others have pointed out, our plea again today is to those Australians who, understandably, emotionally, would want to wade into that water, to cross that river crossing, to rescue animals or to try and preserve perhaps belongings. And that is, Mr Speaker, as I say, understandable, but please do not do it. We've seen countless lives lost in our country over many years, where people with good intent have gone into those waterways, and the rapid nature of them just means that you cannot compete. Whether you're in a four-wheel drive or a tractor or in a motor vehicle, it is just not a fair competition, Mr Speaker. And listen to the advice of the police and the emergency services authorities, particularly New South Wales and Queensland at the moment. Don't enter those waterways. And Australians will see once again the familiar uniform of the Australian Defence Force going to the assistance of Australians in need. We will do whatever it takes to provide assistance to those Australians now, Mr Speaker, and through the recovery phase.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Why 9 days after Mr Gaetjens told the Prime Minister he was putting his inquiry on hold, did the Prime Minister tell the House about the inquiry, quote, "Those inquiries are being made," quote, "This work is being done by the Secretary of my department," and quote, "He has not provided me with a further update," end quote, when, in fact, inquiries were not being made, the work was not being done, and Mr Gaetjens had provided an update? Why did the Prime Minister mislead the House?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I have not. Because I have not, Mr Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition says end quote, but it wasn't the end of the quote, was it? Because I said he has not provided me with a further update about when I might expect that report, Mr Speaker. And he did not, Mr
Members
Speaker.
on both sides.
And he did not. He did not give me a date or a timing, Mr Speaker, about when that report would be provided, Mr Speaker. And as I responded to a question on this in my media conference this morning, Mr Speaker, the Secretary was continuing to conduct interviews, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, what the Leader of the Opposition has brought into this place in a desperate attempt to smear, Mr Speaker, in a desperate attempt to smear, is not true, Mr Speaker. It's not true. This Leader of the Opposition seeks to only smear, Mr Speaker, when in a time like this, Mr Speaker, he should be seeking to engage in productive effort.
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of...
I asked that it be withdrawn, Mr Speaker.
The interjections were so loud, I don't want you to repeat what it was, but when you weren't interjecting, many others were behind you.
Mr Speaker, it was a very straight question. It quoted what the Prime Minister said and the gap between that and what's actually happened. And he responds with abuse.
Members on both sides, the member for Cooper will cease interjecting. If unparliamentary remarks are made, I've mentioned this before, and there's a wall of interjections, it's very difficult for me to make a judgment on that. What I'm judging from the Leader of the Opposition is he didn't like the way the Prime Minister was answering the question. But if members want me to be able to rule on these matters, they need to cease interjecting. And it's a timely point now, at halfway through question time, that I'll issue a general warning. And I'll call the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is ensuring assistance is reaching flood-affected Australians immediately, particularly through eligible disaster payments? How can Australians access this support now?
The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thank the member for his question. As at 11:30 this morning, Services Australia has now granted over 4,300 claims. That's 1,800 claims being paid in the first 3.5 hours of this morning. It equates to $5.7 million going straight to families and communities. The House should be aware there's over 1,000 Services Australian staff now from all over the country as an all-of-nation effect, operating until 8 p.m. tonight and then from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week until such time as the disaster has passed us. The majority of claims are being finalised over the phone, and with the government's new payment platform, money is paid into the family's bank account within an hour. So I'd encourage all Australians who find themselves impacted to call the emergency number at 180-2266. And to give the House an idea of just the sheer extent of where claims are coming from, as at last night, 469 claims from the Central Coast Council area, 425 from the Mid Coast Council, 321 from Port Macquarie Hastings, 179 from Kempsey, 145 from Coffs Harbour, 136 from Cessnock. This is across Dobell, Robinson, Lyne, Cowper, Hunter and Shortland, and the numbers continue. Australians are calling and meeting eligibility because they're either seriously injured, because they've got significant damage to their home, making it uninhabitable, destroyed, structurally unsound, or major flooding inside, making it unlivable, or significant damage to major assets. So Australians are doing it tough right across the country at present, but especially in New South Wales. So I'd encourage all Australians impacted to call 180-2266 for the Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment, $1,000 per eligible adult and $400 per child. So a family of 5, 2 partners and 4 kids, that's $3,200. And of course, if an individual's work is impacted, please call to access a disaster recovery allowance, which is a 13-week income support payment. Australians should also be aware that all debts for the affected LGAs, for any citizen that may have a debt, has been suspended. They don't need to do anything. No Australian in those areas needs to do anything. You can call Services Australia for advice, but those debt pauses have occurred automatically to ensure Australians won't be overly burdened during a difficult period.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I ask, why does the Prime Minister fail to even take responsibility when he himself misleads Parliament? Why is someone else always to blame?
The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, wrapping up a whole bunch of abuse into a question, Mr Speaker, abuse, Mr Speaker, and making unfounded allegations when I've very clearly answered the matters the Leader of the Opposition has raised, Mr Speaker, goes to the character of the Leader of the Opposition, not to the Prime Minister, Mr Speaker.
The member for Cowan. The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister outline to the House how the next national plan to reduce violence against women and their children is being established and developed to address the scourge of domestic violence?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Reid for her question, commend her on her strong work in parliamentary committees on this issue, and note that she spoke about domestic violence in her first speech to this place. There is no excuse for family, domestic or sexual violence. Excuses like, it's not that bad, I can't help it, someone else made me do it, are no excuse. Which is why, Mr Speaker, we will not rest, and there is always more work to be done. 1 in 6 women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or previous partner since the age of 15. And sadly, things that draw communities together can also tear families apart. We saw that during COVID, when we all stayed home to stay safe. But for many women, home was not a safe place to be. And last year, the Morrison government was able to deliver $150 million in a domestic violence response package because of the changing needs of COVID, in addition to our $340 million record investment in the 4th Action Plan. As we across the parliament address some of the shocking allegations and behaviours that have come to light, it's important that we focus on outcomes. Outcomes for the women we represent. Outcomes for the women who are counting on us out there.
Member for Franklin.
Mr Speaker, governments
Member
do
for Franklin
have...
will leave under Standing Order 94A. I've issued a general warning. I asked her to stop interjecting. I've asked her on a number of days, and after asking her just then, she interjected again. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Governments do have a crucial role to play, but so does each and every one of us. And research has shown that while 4 in 5 people agree that violence against women starts with disrespect, many people are not confident that they know how to confront the issue. Taking action on the issue, well, it can seem overwhelming, but if we all take steps together, it will add up to positive change for Australia. I encourage everyone to have a look at the suite of resources on respect.gov.au and start a conversation about respect with the people in their lives. With respect to the sexual violence we've seen in our workplace, it is never okay. The Prime Minister and each and every one of us in this House has made that clear. Change is coming. We all need to be part of that change. We all need to be part of getting our house in order. And as we develop the consultation leading up to the 5th National Action Plan to reduce violence against women and their children, we will hear from all of the voices out there that have been raised in support of women, in support of equal opportunity, in support of human rights. And we are determined to leave no one behind.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Why did the Department of Finance ask for the scheduled cleaning of the Defence Minister's office to be brought forward to a Saturday, the day Brittany Higgins was found?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm not aware of any instructions that were provided by any ministers or anyone else in relation to that matter, and that was an administrative matter determined by the department. And if there is any other suggestion that has been made, then I think that's a very serious suggestion to have been made, Mr Speaker. That is a matter that was dealt with by officials of the Department of Finance, Mr Speaker. That's what I'm advised.
The member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology. Will the Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is backing Australia's medical products manufacturers to grow and create new jobs as we continue our recovery from COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And last Friday, I was thrilled to be in the member for Chisholm's electorate, and we officially opened a new manufacturing wing of Planet Innovation. They are a cutting-edge medtech and commercialisation company in the electorate of Chisholm. Now, Planet Innovation stepped up during COVID-19. They were involved in the manufacture of ventilators. And they are really a very, very good example of the sorts of businesses that are helping to drive our economy post-COVID-19. Now, when it comes to manufacturing, Planet Innovation does the whole lot. from research and design right the way through to in-house production. And they create breakthrough products as well as commercially successful spin-off businesses. So what they are doing is actually demonstrating what this government is planning to achieve through our modern manufacturing strategy, which is to start to bring the entire smile curve into manufacturing, which goes all the way from research and development and design through the production processes through to the distribution, after sales and marketing at the end of it. So they're a very, very good example of that, and they are doing such great work in the medical product sector, which is exactly what this Morrison government is hoping to achieve. Now, over the last 12 months alone, they have created an additional 100 jobs in manufacturing, and they have plans over the next 4 years to grow that number so that there will be an additional 700 jobs. And this, again, is exactly what we will be achieving through the $1.5 billion modern manufacturing strategy that we are already rolling out right across Australia. And it's a clear demonstration of why medical products is one of our very significant 6 national manufacturing priorities. Now, we do have a very strong and a very proud history of pioneering many commercially successful medical products that have made it onto the world stage, from the green whistle pain reliever through to cochlear implants and, of course, the cervical cancer vaccine. Australia does really bat above its weight here, and we have a significantly strong sector in our medical products. So the Morrison government is absolutely committed to doing all that we can to support that sector to grow so that it can create more jobs, so that the manufacturing sector here in Australia can grow and continue to grow, making sure that there are jobs for the future generations of Australians.
The member for Ballarat.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I ask for the 12th time. Is it true the Prime Minister's staff sought to undermine Brittany Higgins' loved ones? Has the Prime Minister asked his staff? If not, why not?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have no information to suggest that, Mr Speaker, and my answer is the same as I provided to the question on every other occasion.
The member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison-McCormack government is working to provide critical telecommunications disaster relief?
The Minister for Communications.
Well, I do thank the member for Mallee for her question, and she, like all in this House, is obviously very concerned about the impact of the present floods in New South Wales, Queensland and increasingly in other parts of Australia as well. I've spoken just before coming into question time to the Chief Executives of both NBN and Telstra to be updated on the work they're doing. In New South Wales, the latest information we have is some 69 NBN network sites are affected, some 5,300 services are impacted. The main cause of the loss of service is the loss of power, and where possible NBN is using backup generators, although that does depend upon whether they can get access to locations, and in some circumstances that is not yet feasible, it's too dangerous. In terms of Telstra at the moment, there's a loss of coverage across 35 mobile sites in the Telstra network. Telstra advises me that it's instigated its Regional Management Emergency Services Plan. It's directly engaging with relevant state emergency services. Their focus in particular is on mobile service restoration. That's the highest priority. And on the 21st of March, Telstra announced a disaster relief assistance package for affected customers. One of the commitments that we made following the bushfires was to establish STAND, the program supporting strengthening telecommunications against natural disasters. And as part of that, NBN has already been funded to and has acquired 5 new satellite dish-equipped Roadmaster trucks and 12 satellite dishes in transportable kits. Now, these resources are available to be deployed as required should the emergency services organisations request them. One of those Sky Muster trucks is in Coffs Harbour and is available to be deployed as required. What we've seen with these trucks and earlier versions of them when used in natural disasters is that they can go into towns where communications has been lost, and by connecting to the satellite they can immediately provide Wi-Fi connectivity to people who are within close proximity of the truck. And similarly, the flyaway kits, the temporary satellite dishes, also provide that facility. So that's a very important service, and those facilities are available on standby for the emergency services organisations should they request them. So both NBN and Telstra are staying very closely engaged with state emergency services. The government staying closely involved with NBN and Telstra and the other telcos to do everything that can be done to maintain network continuity of service, and of course also as floodwaters recede there will be work to do to restore affected facilities.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. On budget night in October last year, the Treasurer announced that his hiring credit for under 35s would, quote, support around 450,000 jobs for young people. Can the Treasurer confirm that as of this month, only 521 new hires had been delivered under his scheme?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, we have provided that information as the Shadow Treasurer understands, but the key point is this program is still in its early stages.
The member for Rankin has asked his question.
Thank you.
The
Mr
Treasurer
Speaker,
has the call.
Only the member for Rankin would ask a question about the labour market after it had had a stunning result, Mr Speaker, after it had a stunning result. Now, when it comes to the JobMaker hiring credit, the member for Rankin has indicated what's been in the media reports over the last few days as a result of this program's early take-up. Now, what we do know, though, is that when it comes to the
member
labour
for Rankin
market,
is on thin ice.
Mr Speaker, when it comes to the labour market, the unemployment rate for those under the age of 35 today is 8.5%, Mr Speaker. Now, for those aged over 35, the unemployment rate is 4.2%, Mr Speaker. And what we have taken from Australia's experience with previous recessions is the scarring of the labour market can be particularly acute when it comes to young people. And that is why we designed a program that was designed to get younger people who are unemployed into work, Mr Speaker, to get young people who are unemployed into work. And what we also know is that there have been 876,000 jobs that have been created in the last 9 months, Mr Speaker. And what we saw in the jobs numbers for February, more than 40% of the 88,700 jobs that were created went to young people, Mr Speaker. So the reality is the labour market is showing remarkable resilience, but there is still a challenge getting younger people aged under 35 into work. The unemployment rate, and I repeat, is 8.5% for those aged under 35, where it's 4.2% for those aged above 35. That is what the JobMaker hiring credit is designed to do, and what we are focused on this side of the House is getting more people into work.
The member for Chisholm. The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on how Australia is supporting our Pacific neighbours in the battle against COVID-19, as well as how international and domestic vaccine developments are helping to protect Australian lives and livelihoods?
The Minister for Health.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Higgins, not just for the question but for her service to the Australian people through her medical work over many years and many decades. We know that, sadly, as the COVID-19 pandemic has continued, having improved over recent months, it has deteriorated in recent weeks. 486,000 cases in the last 24 hours, 7,500 lives lost, over 2.7 million lives lost in all, and those are just the official figures. At the same time, again, we have been blessed in Australia to have 0 cases of community transmission for the 51st day this year. An extraordinary result. But we know as we look to our near neighbours, in Papua New Guinea we see that there have been almost 400 recorded cases in the last 24 hours and that as a consequence Australia is stepping in and stepping up to assist our neighbours. The AUSMAT team has been dispatched today. They've been dispatched with almost 8,500 vaccines, as well as the consumables to support that rollout to assist with the health workers of PNG. There's more to come from the National Medical Stockpile and from our international inventories of vaccines as we push to have those released. At the same time as taking that action with PNG, there's also been very important news for the world. The AstraZeneca clinical trial results released overnight, over 32,000 patients, 100% effectiveness against serious illness, hospitalisation or loss of life. That is an extraordinary result which should lead to a great deal of confidence, not just here in Australia, but around the world. These vaccines are literally saving lives and protecting lives, and we are fortunate to have that access to 50 million domestically produced, Australian-made, CSL-produced AstraZeneca vaccines. Over the last 24 hours, we've seen a 10% growth in our entire national vaccination rate to now over 312,000 vaccinations that have occurred in Australia. 62,000 within our aged care sector, 634 aged care facilities with first doses, 110 aged care facilities with second doses, and people around the country putting themselves forward and general practices around the country participating in the program. I want to thank all of those who've come forward to be engaged, all of those who have participated in this program, and what we are seeing now is action which will save lives both here in Australia and across the waters in PNG.
The member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Liz, Lynn, Nicole, Matt, Jess and Kim work at a travel agency in Warren Ponds. They're all worried they will lose their jobs when JobKeeper is ripped away later this month. And their boss, Greg, is working 4 jobs just to keep afloat. Subsidised flights won't help this business. Why is the Prime Minister ripping away JobKeeper while it's still needed by hard-working small business owners like Greg and his employees?
The Prime Minister.
The Minister will add further to my answer. The support that has been put in place through the measures of 50% discount on flights. One of the key elements of that is to ensure that travel agencies are working closely with aviation operators, our airlines, to put together packages to take people into travel agents to give them that business. But more importantly, Mr Speaker, the $250 million, the $250 million of direct assistance into the travel agent sector is directly targeted towards supporting those businesses who have been one of the most affected through the crisis. But I'll ask the Minister to add further the answer.
The Minister for Trade.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and further to the Prime Minister, can I thank the member for Corangamite for a question, because it's an incredibly important question, and the government is providing over $250 million of support to our travel agents. We've done that through an initial $128 million program, and so far as of the 18th of March, almost $91 million in grant funding has been paid, and 2,656 travel agents have received payments under the program, and another 437 are being processed at the moment. Can I also say to travel agents, at the moment we're putting the final parameters around the new $130 million program. We had a meeting between Austrade and the 4 representative bodies last week. There will be further meetings this week. As a matter of fact, I'll be doing some consultations this afternoon on the new $130 million program, and we want to make sure that it is targeted and will provide the assistance and relief that the travel agents need. Now, we also know that our discount flight program is working as well. It will start. You might scoff on the other side. You might scoff on the other side, but seriously, you scoffed on Home Builder. I mean, this is the feedback we've had already, and it hasn't even started yet. It hasn't even started yet. We have seen over 40% increase in bookings from Virgin and in Qantas before the program has even started. And you know why? Because it's put confidence in people's will and want to travel, which is what it was designed to do. And when it kicks in April, my message to all Australians is grab those discount flights and do so through your travel agents, because that way not only will you be helping the broader travel industry, you'll be helping travel agents as well.
The member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia. Will the Minister outline to the House the work and research Geosciences Australia has been undertaking to support and assist our communities in managing the impact of floods?
The Minister for Resources, Water and Northern Australia has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the honourable member for Herbert for his question? Mr Speaker, what we are seeing through New South Wales and Queensland and other areas, of course, at the moment in terms of floods is absolutely devastating. And I know the member for Herbert as a candidate was out on the ground in the Townsville floods, filling sandbags, talking to communities. And I want to commend all of those individuals who are out there putting their life at risk, who are out assisting their communities, whether it's the SES, other emergency services or community members themselves. Mr Speaker, I come from a community that suffered similar devastation as many members in this place have. And for my mob, Mr Speaker, I know that what's currently going on is bringing back very bad memories for them. Very bad memories for them. However, I'm very pleased to advise the House that through one of the agencies of the Commonwealth, Geoscience Australia, we are actively supporting the Emergency Management Australia's Crisis Coordination Centre during the current floods with world-class spatial support and information. Mr Speaker, Geoscience Australia is generating data from satellite imagery, including delineation and damage assessment maps and reports that are being used right now. They are being used right now to assist in the emergency response. Mr Speaker, Geoscience Australia is providing access to the rapid damage assessments that will give the Crisis Coordination Centre the most accurate record of houses affected by floods. Now, in addition, GA is compiling all of the imagery and data from these events into the Australian Flood Information Portal to better prepare us for the future. So, Mr Speaker, whilst we're in the middle of the response, whilst there are Australians doing it very tough in very difficult circumstances, we are looking to the recovery and we are looking to the future for resilience. Mr Speaker, just because an area hasn't flooded in the past doesn't mean that it won't flood in the future. It does not. So it's incredibly important that we map the characteristics of these floods as they occur, and that's why GA is in there with that world-leading satellite data and flood mapping. Mr Speaker, flood mapping data from historical and recent flood events will be available for communities to make decisions about how they will rebuild and prepare for the next event, and that's an important point, Mr Speaker. When it comes to resilience, we must bring communities with us on that journey into the future. So access to the Australian Flood Information Portal, as well as the water observations from space, provides engineers, insurers and planners with flood map information down to street level, Mr Speaker, so experts can better understand risks and take appropriate mitigation actions. It is about local response, working with local communities and planning into the future in terms of resilience, and our agencies, including Geoscience Australia, are out there doing that right now. And I want to commend our colleagues, and I say our colleagues, Mr Speaker, who are out in their communities right now, working very closely with those individuals who are affected, and right across government will continue to provide that support.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emission Reduction. I refer to the Minister's pre-election commitment to spend $4 million of taxpayers' money to deliver a feasibility study for a Collinsville power plant. Can the Minister confirm the Auditor-General's finding that the company said it couldn't deliver a feasibility study with this grant, but the government gave the grant away anyway? Doesn't the Auditor-General's scathing finding confirm that this was a grant to deliver votes, not energy, and now it won't even deliver a piece of paper?
The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for McMahon for his question, his first question to me in his new role after his predecessor was sacked, Mr Speaker. But, and of course, this is a question that relates to the coal industry, and we know his views on the coal industry, Mr Speaker, but we took to the election a commitment to feasibility study for new generation projects and other projects to support the stability and security of the grid in Queensland, Mr Speaker, based on work that was done that said that security needed to be looked after, Mr Speaker. We're supporting a 1.5 gigawatt pumped hydro scheme at Urana. We're working with the Queensland Government on the electrification of Curtis Island, Mr Speaker, and of course the feasibility study that he a moment ago referred to, Mr Speaker. But let me be clear in response to his question. The department recommended the grant. The department made an unequivocal recommendation. Let me read from the ANAO report. The two funding recommendations met the requirement for clear recommendations that funding be awarded to each applicant, Mr Speaker. That's what the department said, because the department understands, unlike those opposite, that Australia needs affordable, reliable generation in this country. It needs a balance of energy sources to do that, whether it's renewables, gas or coal, Mr Speaker, and those opposite are opposed to the reliable, affordable generation that Australians need, Mr Speaker.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is working to open up new trade opportunities for Australian businesses to create more jobs for more Australians?
The Minister for Tourism, Trade and Investment.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Boothby for her question and for her advocacy for trade liberalisation. I know she believes how important it is, especially for regional Australia, that we continue to pursue markets, open markets for our regional and rural exporters. Mr Speaker, last night there was a meeting of the Ottawa Group, which is a small group of ministers that are absolutely committed to seeing World Trade Organisation reform take place. And we met with the new Director-General of the World Trade Organisation. And in only 3 weeks she has shown a passion and commitment to making sure we drive World Trade Organisation reform, make sure that the independent umpire is playing its role and is going to be a key for driving further market liberalisation. And all countries on that call were absolutely committed to give the World Trade Organisation back its preeminence and make sure that it is a driver for good when it comes to market liberalisation. And under her stewardship, I'm absolutely confident that we are going to be able to see reform of the appellate body and also important work done on things like fishery subsidies, on agricultural subsidies, on access to health products. Very, very important things that the global economy needs right at the moment. So at the multilateral level, we are engaging and we are doing what we can to make sure that we're going to get outcomes for our exporters, meaningful outcomes for our exporters. We're also pursuing huge opportunities bilaterally, both with the European Union and the United Kingdom. And our negotiators, when it comes to the United Kingdom Free Trade Agreement, have just finalised the 4th round of negotiations, and good progress is being made on that free trade agreement. And as all of us know, given what has happened historically 50 years ago, to be able to bring our two economies back together in a way that we haven't seen for half a century would be fantastic, not only for the Australian economy but also for the UK economy. And I'm looking forward to continuing those negotiations. The 10th round of negotiations have also just concluded when it comes to the European Union. Once again, substantial progress was made. As a matter of fact, our chief negotiator, Alison Burrows, said to me more progress was made in the 10th round than has been in the previous 9, so that is really positive signs. This will open up consumers, $515 million, 515 million consumers for Australian exporters. Two incredibly important markets for us, and two which will help our export growth and, importantly, drive jobs growth in this nation.
Concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Now that both the House of Representatives and the Senate have called for the government to establish a Royal Commission into veteran suicide, will he now respect the will of the people and our parliamentary democracy by unequivocally announcing that he will establish one?
The Prime Minister has the
call. Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition would know, I have never opposed the establishment of a Royal Commission, Mr Speaker. What we've been seeking to do as a government is to put in place a permanent, statutory, independent commission with the powers of a Royal Commission to address these issues, Mr Speaker. But I've made very clear in the way that the government has responded to that motion, Mr Speaker, but we do intend to go down this path. But I'm working through those issues currently, and I'm also working with crossbenchers in the Senate, Mr Speaker, because I believe both of these mechanisms are very important. And I would call on the opposition to support the government's bill that deals with the independent statutory commission that can ensure that we have actions and powers in place now as well, Mr Speaker. And I would invite the opposition to support that, Mr Speaker. I think.
Member for Solomon. Prime Minister has
Mr Speaker, I would invite them to join us in that. I think both measures can both support veterans, which is what I think we all want, Mr Speaker.
The member for Kennedy has the call.
Prime Minister, isn't 93% of Australia's surface area populated by less than 1 million people? Your government's 20,000-hectare Hughenden irrigation scheme will create 200 farms, a pastoral paradise for 500 families. Won't 15 other such schemes put over 200,000 people into inland Australia? Is not the Hughenden model critical to the creation of a new and more wonderful nation?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The short answer to that question is yes, Mr Speaker. The short answer is yes. While the specifications that the member has outlined, Mr Speaker, I'm certainly to take as he's read them out. Mr Speaker, this is a big project. This is a nation-building project. It's a nation-changing project, particularly for North Queensland, a part of the country that was so ravaged 2 years ago. Today, we are seeing the floods that are ravishing New South Wales, South East Queensland and other parts of the country, and increasingly over the next few days as we see parts of inland Australia. 2 years ago it was North Queensland, and I want to thank the member. I want to thank the member for his support as we stood together in facing that great challenge up there in North Queensland, and the recovery effort that has come in place now in that part of the country is a great testament to the wonderful people of North Queensland and to those in his electorate. The Commonwealth has provided some $10 million towards a detailed business case due to be completed by February 22. He knows, as I know, the member, that I would like to see this done as soon as possible and for things to move as quickly as they possibly can. The Queensland Government has said that they will only consider co-funding once a detailed business case is completed, so we're getting on with that work. The project is managed by the NQWIA. The preliminary business case examines multiple configurations and capacity options and the development of a rockfill embankment with a clay core adjacent to the Flinders River and the Sago Station. Creating an off-stream water storage facility in the order, as the member has said, of 200,000 megalitres. The proposed off-stream water storage facility will enable 84,000 megalitres per year, yielding with a yield of some 80% reliability to support an irrigation area of up to 10,000 hectares of diversified crops over the extensive grasslands of the southern side of the Flinders River. So the member is correct, Mr Speaker, and he might indulge me. If Aunt Mary were alive today, she'd write a verse about this project, Mr Speaker.